All right, so today, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, today, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be beginning our journey, if you will, into the STAR exam. As I mentioned before, in case you were unaware, we are officially 2 calendar weeks out from the STAR exam. April 6th, which is 2 weeks from today, you guys will be taking this all-important test, all right? In case you didn't remember or don't remember, you must pass this test to graduate high school in Texas, all right? Whether it's now, next year, as a sophomore, as a junior, or even as a senior, you must pass this test to graduate. And if you don't pass the test, your path to graduation becomes that much more difficult. Does that make sense? So my goal, my hope, my plan for you guys is to do everything I can to make sure that on April 6th, you take this test and you never have to worry about it again, okay? And we're gonna start that today by talking about some basic strategies for the multiple choice portion of the test, all right? Now, were you guys able to see the lesson from yesterday concerning the multiple choice strategy in terms of the overall strategy that is broken down into, and you can't really see it, but I have it on here. So the overall strategy is broken down into 6 steps. Did you guys take a look at that yesterday? There were some technical difficulties for you guys. I apologize for that. I put the wrong date for publishing. Schools are like, it's supposed to open up at a certain time on a certain day. And instead of putting March 22nd, I put April 5th. I pressed the wrong button. That's my fault. So I take full responsibility for that. It's up now. You can see it. It's not the issue anymore. But if you weren't able to see it yesterday, then I'll just do a brief run through from that lesson yesterday before we get into what we're going to be doing today, tomorrow, and Thursday. All right. But all right, the overall strategies, okay, and here are the strategies. I'll just review it real quick. All right, so here's the layout. All right, again, this is just a brief, quick review from yesterday if you didn't get to see it. If you did, I apologize for boring you to death, but you know, it is what it is. All right, so this is the basic layout. Your STAR exam is going to be broken down into 2 major components. The first component will be, or one of the components will be the multiple choice. The other component will be the writing portion, okay? Now, the multiple choice is broken down, it's further broken down into 3 components. Those 3 components are reading or revising, editing, and then the reading part, okay? What will happen is, remember, revising and editing are 2 different things, okay? Revising is making it better. Editing is making it correct, right? So when we're talking about revising, we're talking about changing a sentence, adding a word, subtracting a word, combining sentences, things like that to make what you're saying more effective, okay? Whereas editing is making sure words are spelled correctly, making sure you have the right punctuation, things of that nature. Does everybody understand that difference? Okay? And you're going to get questions that address both of them. You're going to get multiple choice questions that address both of those. The reading portion is just that. It's basically reading comprehension. Okay? You're going to read a passage, and you're going to answer questions based on that passage. All right, and that is the multiple choice portion of your STAR exam. I've been asked before how many questions are on the exam. My understanding is that they've kind of shortened things a little bit over the last couple of years. So I would anticipate anywhere from 42 to 52 multiple choice questions. Might be a little bit more, might be a little bit less, but that range, you'll probably fall somewhere within that range, all right? Then, of course, you have the essay. We're going to really delve into that more next week, all right? But you do have the essay where you get the prompt and you have to write according to the prompt, all right? So you have taken a STAR exam before, so I'm not going to bore you with the basic setup, all right? You have the passage, the text, followed by questions related to the text, okay? Now, one of the things I want to point out as we move forward, right, are the direction. The strategies that we're going to discuss here in a few minutes, the strategies that we're going to discuss are primarily meant to help you be more efficient time-wise and be more effective when taking this test, right? And I'm going to say this on video, but I'm okay with it. If you utilize these strategies effectively, you will not have to read an entire passage on this test. You will not have to read a passage in its entirety on this STAAR exam if you utilize these strategies effectively, okay? Because, and I'm not trying to bash anybody, but part of growth is being real with ourselves, right? You guys don't possess the attention span, right? Like you don't. And that's just the world you live in. Like, it's not even a slight against you. It's just the world you live in. It's what I call a microwave society. You're used to things happening fairly quickly, fairly instantly, right? If you went home right now and you looked in the pantry, it could be a pantry full of food. It could be a freezer full of food. But if you can't throw it in the microwave and cook it in 5 minutes, you're going to tell your parents there's nothing to eat. Mom, there's nothing to eat. What are you talking about? I just went grocery shopping. Well, everything in here requires more than 5 minutes. So I don't want to spend that kind of time. There's nothing to eat. There's not a bag of chips you can rip open quickly, a Pop-Tart or a Hot Pocket. There's nothing to eat. Chick-fil-A. So that's just the world you live in. So rather than sit here and try to continue to enforce that traditional way to take the test, we're going to talk about the strategy, okay? But one of the things I want you to pay attention to is the directions. Because this is meant to be time efficient, my hope is that you guys will spend more time reading the directions. You'll be surprised how many questions you get wrong because you didn't read the directions and therefore did not understand what you were being asked. Does that make sense? So here you see the directions for revising and editing, right? Notice they are essentially the same, okay? Does not mean don't read them. I'll say that again. Even though the instructions for revising and editing questions are essentially the same, it does not mean don't read them. That's 5 to 7 seconds of your life. Over the course of a 5-hour test, not that big of a deal. You are not saving anything. You're not saving any extraordinary amount of time. You're not shortening the test by not reading the directions. The only thing you're doing is putting yourself in a precarious position to get something wrong because you didn't understand what you were being asked. So please read the directions. Does that make sense? Now, but there is one I want to pay attention to specifically, and that's for the reading, for the actual passages, the comprehension passages, if you will. Okay? Even in middle school, this section was reading comprehension, if I'm not mistaken, right? On the STAAR. Notice this has instructions for 2 passages. Okay? This has instructions for 2 passages. First one says, use I believe in the also-rans to answer questions 26 through 32. Then fill in the answers on your answer document. So that says clearly questions 26 through 32 will be about this passage only. Everybody see that? But now if you look underneath it, it says use a baseball school for big league dreamers. And I believe in the also-rans to answer questions 33 through 37. Then fill in the answers on your answer document. So what that is saying is questions 33 through 37 cover 2 passages, not just one. That's important to understand, that if you don't read past that first instruction, you will answer all the questions based on what? The first passage. Or what I will say is you increase the likelihood that you will answer all the questions based on the first passage if you don't read all the instructions. Does that make sense? So it's vitally important that you read all the instructions to make sure you have a full understanding of what you're being asked. Very simple thing, but you and I both can agree that if I put a test in front of you right now and said 5 hours go, an hour in, the last thing you're worried about is the instruction. You're just going to look at it and think you know what to do, and then you kind of go with it because you want to hurry up and get it done. Make sense? That's an honest assessment, not a bashing. Now, here's how you have been taught to take the STAAR. When you read the passage in its entirety, then you read each question, and then you answer each question carefully. There's nothing wrong with that method, ladies and gentlemen. However, raise your hand if you honestly have what it takes to do that for 5 straight hours. 1 out of 8. That's 12.5%. right? It's 12.5%. It's not a very good percentage. If I win the NBA and I shot 12.5% from the three-point line, I wouldn't be in the NBA very long. Does that make sense? There's very few things where 12.5% is a good number. Maybe an interest rate on a savings on an account. If somebody told you I'm gonna give you 12.5%, what? Yeah, sign me up, right? All right, so here's something else I want to point out before we get into the strategies real quick. All right. You see here where it says, remember, the STAAR can be tiresome because it's a 5-hour test with no break. Right. Once you come in this room, one or two things will happen. Either you will be told to leave your phone outside the door, or as you walk in the door, there will be a bin for you to place your phone in. And that phone does not exist for the next 5 hours. I don't know if any of you have ever gone voluntarily without your phone for that long. I said voluntarily, like you're giving up your phone for an extended period of time. But the point I'm trying to make is you will not have access to your phone for 5 straight hours. You will not be able to talk to anyone. It'll just be you, the test, and your own thoughts. We'll get there. Yes. So my understanding, here's how typically that works. Because this is a state test, as long as there is at least one person in the room taking the test, you are still considered under testing conditions. Now, I was getting to that. If everybody in the room is done and the proctor, let's say I'm the proctor, I collect up all the tests, I turn all the tests in. When I come back, you're still kind of confined to the room, but it's a different circumstance. Even though we as a school are still under testing conditions, this room is done. So that's when you can kind of relax a little bit. Does that make sense? Because now no one in the room is testing. All the test booklets and test materials are turned in. So now I, as a proctor, can say, okay, here's your phone back. It doesn't mean you can go in the hallway because the school is still under testing condition. But in this room, we're done, we're done. Does that make sense? So even if there's another hour or two left, that gives I, as a proctor, we have leeway because the testing in here is done. Right? Well, that's what I'm trying to prevent, right? So now here's the other part. If you look on this board, you'll see it says it tends to contain boring text. Boring is subjective, okay? Boring is based on the person reading. If you are into sports and you love that and you don't love anything else, then a text about the mating habits of emperor penguins will absolutely be boring to you. Does that make sense? If, on the other hand, you love nature and you love all things nature, then a passage about the 96 Bulls and Michael Jordan will absolutely be boring to you. Whereas a passage about the reproductive habits of the African dung beetle will absolutely fascinate you. And you will read every word. Does that make sense? The reason I'm bringing that up, ladies and gentlemen, is because I need you right now, 2 weeks out, to accept the fact that the state of Texas does not care about your interests. Raise your hand if you filled out and sent back the survey that the TEA sent asking what you would like to read about on the STAAR exam. Really? And what did you tell them on this survey? What did the survey look like? You know why you don't remember? Because they didn't send you one. The state of Texas did not send you a survey saying, what would you like to read about on the STAAR exam? No, they don't. No, they don't. No, they didn't. The state of Texas has never done that. They have never sent out a survey saying, what would you like to read about on the STAAR? They've never done that. But that was not one of them. So the point I'm trying to make to you is this. They don't care. Be prepared to be bored. Be prepared to read about stuff that you don't have an actual interest in. It's important that you know that, accept that, embrace that. Because if you open up that exam booklet and the first thing is like, oh my God, I don't care about this, you've already put yourself at a disadvantage. Expect that it's not going to be something that you're interested in, and just understand what they're asking for, which is read this passage, answer these questions. If you automatically turn yourself off because you don't like it, it's going to be really hard for you to understand. Make sense? Or it's going to be harder. Okay. Now, there is a better way. Work smarter, not harder, right? Here's the basic strategy, ladies and gentlemen. Okay. Here's the basic strategy. It is online. I'm not going to bore you with the details of it because it's online so you can see it. But this is an overall strategy that involves 6 steps. First, you want to read the question, right? We've all been told that before, pre-read the question. And the reason for that is, number one, you get to find out what the question is actually asking, and then you can make a determination of what you need to do to answer the question, okay? Second, you want to read all the answer options for obvious reasons. Make sure you confirm what the question is asking. Third, you want to eliminate the wrong answers, and we'll talk about that in a second. Fourth, select the best answer. Fifth and sixth, okay? Steps 5 and 6, skip it and come back. The amount of concentration currency that you have for this test has to be spread across 42 to 52 questions plus an essay for 5 hours. Do not spend a whole bunch of time on 1 or 2 questions. Do not waste your concentration on 3 questions, because in hour 2.5 and hour 3, if you do that, if you blow it all on the first 10 questions in the first hour and a half, guess what you're going to do in that last hour when you're only on question 32 out of 52? You're going to start guessing. You're going to start just filling stuff in because you're going to be mentally tired. I would recommend 1.5 to 2 minutes per question. And that includes the amount of time it takes for you to look back in the text for the answer. If you don't know what it is after 1.5 to 2 minutes, mark that question and move on to the next one. Do not waste all your concentration trying to figure out 1 or 2 questions. Does that make sense? All right. So then the final one is use other questions as clues. This requires you to pay attention a little bit, because used correctly, you can use one question to help you answer another. Does that make sense? Especially when it comes to things like revising editing and even in the reading comprehension, which we'll get into. Then the other thing I need you to be aware of, is the dictionary. If I said right now, could somebody tell me the meaning of the word flabbergasted? I know you know what it means, but for those that, context clues should tell you that if you know how to use it. But most of you right now, if I said, look up the word kerfluffle, here's what you would do. The phones that you currently have in your hands, you go to Google and you type in the word, and then you would read me back the definition. Right. On April 6th, you will not be able to do that, ladies and gentlemen. You see those things back there in the room? Yes. I know it's easy. The point is, you are not accustomed to using them. Okay, that's good, because we're going to be using them a lot in between now and then. But do not be afraid to use the dictionary. And also, don't get hung up when you're trying to define a word. When you're trying to define a word, you see a word in the definition that you don't know. That happens a lot. Now, I want to point in the first strategy, all right? In the first strategy, it says before you even read the text, read the question first, right? The reason you're doing that is to determine if it's question, sentence, or paragraph specific. Because the purpose of reading the first question is not only to determine what it's asking, but to get pointed in a direction where you can get that answer. Sometimes, depending on how the question is worded, you might not even need to go back to the passage. You might have all the information you need in the question. That's what we call question specific. If it's sentence specific, it will say that. If it's paragraph specific, it will also say that. Okay? Then, of course, we talked about reading the answer options, eliminating wrong answers. And do you guys remember what I told you about 75-25, right? Play the numbers. So if you're playing the two games, let's say we're going to go play a game for some money. One game you can win $500. The other game you can win $250. The $500 game, you have a 25% chance of winning. The $250 game, you have a 75% chance of winning. Why? Why would you take the $250? Because you have a better chance of winning, right? So on any given multiple choice question, you have 4 answers, right? 25%. One of them is correct. You know the other 3 are wrong. So by the numbers, by your own logic, you should be looking for what first? The wrong answers. Because the percentage of you finding them is what? Higher. And as you find the wrong answers, you naturally get led to the right answer. And that's not to say don't look for the right answer, but percentage-wise, 75% chance of success is better than 25. Does that make sense? So again, it's just something to think about as we go forward. All right, then you choose the best answer. And we talked about skipping it and spending too much time on the question and using other questions as clues. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at a couple of questions today, because we're going to do this again tomorrow, and then we're going to do it again on Thursday. All right, we're going to go question by question on the 2017 English I STAAR exam. To give you perspective, the kids that are currently seniors here at Ellison, this is what they took in 2017 as freshmen. Does that make sense? The current seniors, some of whom are still trying to pass this test, by the way, this is the test that they took as a freshman in 2017, okay? So there is similarity between what you will see on this one and what you guys will see in 2 weeks. Obviously, it's not going to be the same passage. It's not going to be the same question, but the text, but in terms of the formatting of the questions, in terms of what they're asking and how they're asking, you're going to see something similar on April 6th. That's why this is a good example for us to use. So what we're going to do is walk through question by question so you can see how the strategy is implemented, how it helps to get to the answer, and most importantly, gain confidence in your ability to implement that strategy when it's just you and this test on April 6th. Does that make sense? So the first thing we see are directions, right? Now, I'm going to sit here for about 5 to 7 seconds. And I'm going to read the direction. Read the selection and choose the best answer to each question. Then fill in the answer on your answer document. So without getting too deep, that first instruction says choose the best answer, which indicates that sometimes you may come across a question that has what? The possibility of more than one answer that could be correct. But the instructions were what? Choose the best answer. Okay, that's something to keep in mind. It's a small thing, but it makes a difference. All right. So, in keeping with our strategy, the first thing we're going to do is go what? Read the question. Now, I'll read the first question. Tracy's paper needs a stronger position statement. Which of the following could best replace sentence 5 and more effectively state the position Tracy is taking in his paper? So, what kind of question is it? Is it sentence specific, paragraph specific? Sentence specific, right? And we know that because it says sentence 5. So I don't have to read the whole passage. I can just go to sentence 5. However, or sentence 4. What type of question is it? Is it revised? Is it edit? Is it reading? It's what? And how do you know that? Right. Remember, revising is about making something better. Editing is about making it correct. Okay. So in this particular case, this is a revised question. We know that from the instructions, and we know that from the way the question is worded. Okay. So now let's go back into the paragraph or the passage, excuse me, and let's take a look at sentence 5. But because it's revised, I always like to look at the sentence before and sometimes the sentence after to give me context. Does that make sense? All right. Even with editing, revise and editing, I like to give context whenever possible. So sentence 5 says the electric car is not what you should buy today. Now, if I add sentence 4 for context, and they have other drawbacks too, the electric car is not what you should buy today. So what is Tracy's position? Say that again. Against electric car. Do not buy an electric car. That's what she said, right? Now that we know that and have established that, if we go back to question 1, if her position is don't buy an electric car, based on what we now know her position to be and what the question is asking for, what do you think the correct answer is? If it doesn't jump out to you, play the numbers. What can we automatically eliminate? D? Okay. However, buying an electric car is always an option. She already said don't. So that's out. Anything else we can eliminate? B? Truthfully, electric cars have advantages that must be pondered before making a purchase. All right. She already said no, don't do it. So that's out. Anything else we can eliminate? So now that leaves us with A and C. What did the question ask us? Effectively state her position, right? So which one of those, A or C, more effectively states her position? Raise your hand if you think it's A. Raise your hand if you think it's C. Everybody thinks it's A? Okay. Well, I happen to have the answer key for this STAAR exam. The correct answer for number 1 is C. Now, let's look at it, right? Her original position, the electric car is not what you should buy today, right? If you adding in number 4, sentence 4, for context, they have other drawbacks. The electric car is not what you should buy today, right? That's what her position is. So now let's look at A. In other words, the electric car is not what you should buy today, and that is my definitive opinion. But if you look at C, if you are currently in the market for a new car, right? Was her position definitive in the paragraph? Did she definitively say you should not buy a car, an electric car? Or did she definitively say you should not buy an electric car today? Remember, we went back to sentence 4 for context, right? She was giving reasons why you shouldn't buy it, right? Now, this is without us actually having to read the entire first paragraph. We're just focused on sentence 5 and for context, sentence 4. All right, so if you look, the electric car is the wrong choice if you're currently in the market for a new car. That one tends to be more effective in the presentation of her position. Does everybody see that, or is it still confusing? All right, let's take a look at question 2. Tracy has used an ineffective transition in sentence 10. Which word or phrase could best replace in the end in this sentence? So let's go to sentence 10. Okay. And for context, I'm going to take a look at sentence 9. Why? Because what are we asking for? The use of a transition, right? Which indicates the movement from one idea to the next. Does that make sense? So that's a small thing to keep in mind, okay? So I'm going to go back to sentence 9 and then move into sentence 10, okay? Furthermore, the plants that manufacture electric cars are putting high levels of carbon dioxide pollutants into the environment. In the end, the production of an electric car puts twice as much carbon dioxide into the atmosphere as the production of a conventional car. So now if you look at the ideas, right? The transition in there is what? In the end. If you look at the ideas, how would we characterize the idea in 9 versus the idea in 10? So look at what she said in sentence 9, right? And look at what she says in sentence 10. How do those two ideas relate to one another? Huh? So they're both talking about the same thing, right? Like, can we agree on that? So if we can agree that she's moving from one idea to a similar, there you go. That's what I was looking for. It's an additive transition, right? It's an add-on. What she said in sentence 10 was an add-on to what? What she said in sentence 9, right? So now, if we look at question 2, what can we automatically get rid of? Huh? We can get rid of however, right? Because however indicates contradiction, right? What else can we get rid of? Because that also indicates contradiction. So that leaves us with obviously and in fact. So remember the question was, which could best? So based on that, what's the answer? Huh? So sentence 10, remember our two choices are obviously and in fact. So here's sentence 10. Let's substitute. Furthermore, the plants that manufacture electric cars are putting high levels of carbon dioxide pollutants into the environment. Obviously, the production of an electric car puts twice as much carbon dioxide into the atmosphere as the production of a conventional car. Does it work? It does, right? But now let's look at, in fact. Furthermore, the plants that manufacture electric cars are putting high levels of carbon dioxide pollutants into the environment. In fact, the production of an electric car puts twice as much carbon dioxide into the atmosphere as the production of a conventional car. So what's the more effective transition? In fact, right? G. And again, I happen to have the answer key in front of me. The correct answer for number 2 is G. See how that works? Let's try one more. What is the most effective way to combine sentences 15 and 16? So now, we are what? Sentence specific, right? We're still revising, but now all we have to worry about is sentences 15 and 16, okay? So now, do we even need to look at them? Okay, let's go look at them. Sentence 15 and 16, right? Oh, hold on, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's not what I wanted. All right, so. Furthermore, the batteries in an electric car weaken over time. Eventually, they allow a person to travel even fewer miles between charges. Okay, so now the question asked us, what's the best way to do what? Combine them. I would argue that we actually did not need to go back into the passage and look for that. That's what we would call a sentence, not a sentence, but a question specific query. Does that make sense? Because all it's asking us is how to combine these two sentences. We go back for context. Okay, what did it look like originally? Which allows us to then transition into how can we put them together most effectively. But we actually did not need per se to go back in there. But furthermore, the batteries in an electric car weaken over time, eventually allowing a person to travel even fewer miles between charges. Furthermore, the batteries in an electric car weaken over time, eventually they allow a person to travel even fewer miles between charges. C says, furthermore, the batteries in an electric car weaken over time, which means the batteries eventually allow a person to travel even fewer miles between charges. Or D, furthermore, the batteries in an electric car weaken over time because they eventually allow a person to travel even fewer miles between charges. What's the most effective combination of those two sentences? B? Raise your hand if you think it's C. Raise your hand if you think it's D. Raise your hand if you think it's A. Raise your hand if you think it's B. Raise your hand for A again. B. C. Remember, it's the best, the most effective. All right, so the correct answer for number 3 is A. Right? It's A. Furthermore, the batteries in an electric car weaken over time, eventually allowing a person to travel even fewer miles between charges. Okay? If you look back, because we did look, and again, you didn't necessarily have to, but if we look back at 15 and 16, weaken over time, eventually they allow a person to travel even fewer miles between charges, okay? So those are 15 and 16. The reason A is more effective, student, all right, we're gonna stop after this. The reason A is more effective, right? If you take a look at B, C, and D, what can we remember? It's about effectiveness, right? So when we're talking about effectiveness from a revision standpoint, we're talking about how to get the point across in the most efficient manner possible, right? We don't want to be worried. We just want to say what we have to say while still maintaining the overall concept of what we're trying to get across. Does that make sense? So with that being said, does D do that? I mean, it still says it, but look how wordy it is. Right. See, what you have to be careful of, especially with questions like this one, is those other answers would be what you would say in regular conversation. Does that make sense? Like when you say those things out loud or even in your head, they make sense because that's what you would probably say in a given conversation. However, from a writing standpoint, from a revision standpoint, you want to be efficient and effective with your words. Does that make sense? So that eliminates D. If you take a look at C, furthermore, the batteries in an electric car weaken over time, which means the batteries eventually allow a person to travel even further. See how wordy and verbose that is, right? See how clunky that sentence is? Does that effectively say what I need to say? Does it say what I want to say? Yes. But does it say it effectively? No, it doesn't. B, furthermore, the batteries in an electric car weaken over time. Eventually, so that's just bad punctuation, right? Because what do we know about transitions and commas? What do we know about transitions and commas? They should go when? After, right? So that automatically eliminates that one, right? So that just leaves us with A. And what? What is it? Well, if you have a method that works for you, I'm never going to tell you not to do it, right? I'm not going to tell you that. All right, so we're going to stop right there. All right, we're going to stop on question 3. We'll pick it up with question 4 tomorrow, ladies and gentlemen. But it's important to understand, okay, especially as we go through the strategy, and that's why we're going to spend so much time on it. I need you guys to get confident using it, because I'm not saying you don't have the ability. I'm simply saying 5 hours is a long time. That's a extended period of time, especially with really no breaks. Okay, so I want you guys to be efficient and get the most out of your concentration abilities over the course of this test. I don't want you sitting in the 4th, almost 5th hour, bubbling stuff in because you lost focus in the first hour or 2, right? Because remember, you still got an essay to write. Okay, you still have an essay to write. So we'll go ahead and stop it right there.